Kia ora. My name is J.D. Evans. Let's read a book. This is Miracle by Jennifer Lane. Miracle is a mystery novel, and Jennifer is an Aotearoa author. Jennifer also publishes through Cloud Ink Press, which is an Aotearoa-based publisher. I'd like to start as usual by thanking both Jennifer Lane and Cloud Ink Press for giving me permission to read the first couple of chapters of Miracle here on YouTube. Let's get started. It's all a blur. All I can remember is Dad following Constable Kelly across the 1, 2, 3, 4 stepping stones that joined our front veranda to our driveway, and thinking, I've really done it now. Born in the middle of Australia's biggest ever earthquake, Miracle is 14 when her world crumbles. Thanks to her dad's new job at Compassionate Cremations, which falls under suspicion for Boorunga's spate of sudden deaths, the entire town turns against their family. Miracle is tormented by her classmates, even by Ollie, the boy she can't get out of her head. She fears for her agoraphobic mother and for her angelic, quake-damaged brother Julian. When Ollie plays a cruel trick on Miracle, he sets off a chain of devastating events. Then Miracle's dad is arrested, and she takes the full weight on her shoulders. How can she convince the town of her dad's innocence? Chapter 1, 27th June 1986. Remembering the knock at the door still makes me shudder. It wasn't actually a knock. A knock is the gentle tap, tap, tap of your auntie dropping off a still warm cottage pie she's cooked for your tea, or your nana if she's driven all the way from Sydney for the weekend without dying from a stroke. This was a bash, bash, bash that made my whole body jolt as if I'd just run smack bang into an electric fence. A bash, bash, bash that left my skin all shivery and bumpy. By the time I reached the hallway, Mum had fumbled through all the locks and was holding the front door open. Her hand gripped its edge so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Is James Jameson home?" a man's voice asked. I knew who it belonged to before I saw the black boots on the doormat, one shiny, one spattered in grey mud. I somehow knew this was a cop's voice, even though I couldn't remember hearing one in real life before. The legs of the cop it belonged to were 2 inches longer than his navy blue trousers, and his bald head, glistening under the porch light, was as round as a ping-pong ball. Under his arm was a hat with a silver badge. "Jim's here, yes. Why? What do you want Jim for?" Mum held her dressing gown tightly around herself with one hand. Her other hand still clung to the front door, as if she was ready to slam it. Dad must have heard the cop's voice. The bedroom door squeaked open, and Mum and I turned to see him emerge. Trudging along the hallway, he looked less like Dad, and more like a man who'd done something really bad. His face was grey in the dull hall light, his hair was flat on one side, and his crumpled work shirt hung halfway to his knees. I wish he'd bothered to put his trousers on. For some reason, his legs, thick, pale, hairy, made him look guilty. "Mr. Jameson," the cop said. "Jim," Dad answered. "Jim Jameson. We've met. Nigel, isn't it? What can I help you with?" "It's Constable Kelly." The cop's breath was coming out all foggy. "You can help by coming with me to the station, Mr. Jameson." Although I should have known all this was about to happen, Constable Kelly may as well have pulled his gun out of his holster and shot me dead on the spot. I opened my mouth to speak, but there was too much to say. Constable Kelly looked down at his 2 short trousers, probably feeling bad about taking Dad away. I can't remember what happened next. Did Dad go back inside to put his jeans on? Surely he didn't go to the station in his blue undies. It was so cold I'd forced 2 tracksuit tops on over my nightie. Did Dad call out a goodbye to Julian? Not that Jules would have heard. He would have been hiding under his blanket, under his bed with his fingers jammed in his ears. Did he mess up my hair? Kiss Mum's cheek? It's all a blur. All I can remember is him following Constable Kelly across the 1, 2, 3, 4 stepping stones that joined our front veranda to our driveway, and thinking, I've really done it now. Chapter 2. 4 months earlier. Hey, what's Jimbo doing here? Katie turned around and tapped her pen on my Spanish folder. I felt the blood rush to my face. There were many ways to walk to the school office. What were the chances of him cutting through A block? But sure enough, Dad's nose appeared at the window, the rest of him following approximately 3 centimeters later. Thick curly hair, the silvery grey of the scourer that sat, a crummy lump, in our kitchen sink, and a permanently sunburnt face, a souvenir from his long career as a postie. He wore a grey suit that must have belonged to someone who'd been twice his size before dying centuries ago, and a look on his face that suggested he was on his way to a meeting with Bob Hawke, rather than our principal, Miss Jones. It was practically 40 degrees, too. He must have been sweltering. I felt a twinge of sadness. Poor Dad. Dunno. I glanced at my watch. 2:15. Well, at least my plan had worked. I'd tricked him. I'd tricked my poor old Dad. Forgot to kiss him goodbye this morning, Katie asked, smirking at Ollie, who sat at the desk next to hers. Ollie was left-handed, and Katie right, so when they wrote down the answers to our 10-minute quiz, their elbows touched. Sometimes I'd torment myself by counting how many times their elbows met. The record was 33. Double Maths, C Block, 6th February, 1985. Katie had a big mouth, but I resisted the urge to tell her to shut it. Even though she was my best friend, she'd always thought she was better than me. It wasn't something we ever talked about, but I was pretty sure that my dad being a postie and her dad owning half of Boorunga had something to do with it. As well as bossing everyone around at Heller's Plastics, a gigantic factory painted in rainbow colours, presumably to compensate for turning the sky above it a dull grey with smoke, Reginald Heller owned the nearby Twirly Swirl biscuit factory. The Twirly Swirl biscuit itself, 2 vanilla wafers with yummy cream stuffed between them, was named by Katie when she was 3. Reginald dressed in proper suits that hadn't been worn before him by men of different sizes and from different eras, and drove a sparkling white car with a sunroof, which he never used because, thanks to Heller's Plastics, Boorunga's air mostly stank like a dead thing lying on the bottom of your water tank. "He's telling Miss Jones he's taking me out of here," I said, trying to be calm, trying to pretend that my classmates weren't elbowing each other and pointing to my dad. A month had passed since Dad's boss at the post office had handed him a typed letter, not for him to deliver, but to open and read himself. I could still see the look in Dad's eyes as he passed it to Mum. It was a look of shame. 10 weeks' pay for 10 years' service, Mum had read out loud. That's downright robbery. What about all those days you worked sick? When you had pneumonia? You risked your life making sure Martha got her Reader's Digest every Tuesday. Ollie turned to face me, snapping me out of my thoughts. His eyes were so beautiful in real life, an even deeper brown than in the picture of him I kept in my mind for when he wasn't around. I had to force myself to keep breathing. In, out, in, out, in, out. "You don't look like him," he said. It was a compliment, I guessed. I wasn't as pretty as Katie, but nor was I one of the fuglies who sat in a sad bunch near the tech block. My dirt-coloured hair permanently looked as if I'd just had an afternoon nap, even after dragging my comb through it, and my freckles, which thankfully hibernated in winter, made my face look like a giant dot-to-dot in summer. Granny Holmes had promised me they'd disappear when I grew up, but at 14 I remained as freckled as ever, so I wondered whether she'd just written that in my 8th birthday card to make me feel better. With a brother as picture-perfect as Julian, people always felt like they had to compliment me on something. "You've got lovely cheekbones," was the best Auntie Harriet could come up with. That, or "You've got the legs of a ballerina." At least I didn't inherit the gene responsible for Dad's nose. Ollie's comment suggested he'd never seen Dad before, that he didn't used to come to our house after school and force me to play classic catches until the tennis ball disappeared into the night sky. Was he embarrassed on Dad's behalf, too? I couldn't blame Ollie. Dad now appeared to be talking to himself, not just muttering under his breath like a normal mental person, but opening his mouth wide and making elaborate gestures with his arms, like someone who should be locked up for life. He was rehearsing his conversation with Miss Jones, I realized, just as he did at home in front of the hall mirror before all his job interviews. Bloody hell, Dad. I wanted to climb under my desk, bury my face in my hands. "Is everyone in your family demented?" That came from Seth, Ollie's best friend. He was sitting on the other side of Ollie, next to Phoebes, his girlfriend since double art on Monday. I was about to choke on the stuffy classroom air. I knew Seth was talking about Julian. Julian is 17 months older than me, but while I survived the Boorunga earthquake unscathed, despite being born smack bang in the middle of it, he wasn't so lucky. I wiped my slippery, sweaty hands on my school tunic. "Is everyone in your family a psychopath?" I glared at Seth. Seth ignored my question, making me wonder whether I'd actually said it out loud. I was much braver inside my head than outside it. Then Ollie said, "I reckon he looks like a hitman. Hope he's here to take out Jonesy." "Is he going for Petey's job?" Seth asked. Petey was the caretaker who'd just been sacked, supposedly for having sex with Susan Singleton among all the balls, hoops, rackets, bats and wickets in the PE shed. "He might get you a new mum, one of those hot year 12s, Seth was saying. One with half a—" "What's the answer to 10D? I asked. I didn't even know what the question was. I just wanted Seth to shut his mouth. Dad wouldn't be like Petey. Petey was only 21, and Dad would always stick with Mum, wouldn't he? "Miracle, you obviously have a lot to say today," Mr. Healy announced from the platform. "Perhaps you can tell us the events that triggered the Spanish Civil War." I looked up, my face burning. Yes, I am called Miracle. That's another thing I can blame on the Boorunga earthquake. The quake measured 6.2 on the Richter scale, one of the biggest ever recorded in Australia, and I was born approximately 30 seconds into it, moments before the glass in the birthing suite's only window exploded. My real name, the name printed on my birth certificate, is Deborah. I could never understand why my parents chose a name with Boor in the middle of it. But it didn't really matter anyway, because once Dad and the midwife had climbed out from under Mum's bed, Dad looked at me and said, "It's a bloody miracle!" Thank God, the bloody part didn't stick. "Can't remember, sorry," I said to Mr. Healy. "Well, if you bothered to listen, maybe you would." Mr. Healy snapped a piece of chalk. I usually paid attention. I got top of the class, sometimes tying with Ollie. Admittedly, I only chose Spanish as an elective because I knew Ollie was taking it, and I wrote all the words on flashcards just to impress him. But it had become my favourite subject too. "Anyone else?" Mr. Healy asked. Big Bobby Sanson raised his hands. I don't know what he said. I just remember seeing his giant, pink arm wavering in the air. After Big Bobby died, I'd lie awake trying to assemble all my memories of him. This, as dull as it was, is one of them. "There goes your dad again," Katie whispered. "Reckon Miss Jones gave him the wooden spoon?" I looked through the window, smeared by the faces, fingers, and God knows what else of generations of Boorunga High kids. Dad was shuffling towards us, head bowed. He glanced up briefly but didn't see me. His face was redder than usual and glimmering with sweat. He no longer looked as if he was on a mission to save the world. Instead, he seemed shrunken, his face as saggy and sad as his old man suit. "God, he must be a good hitman," Seth said over his shoulder. "Didn't make a sound." He turned his hand into a pistol and pointed it at Phoebe's head. Pow! The others laughed, and I forced a smile to pretend I could take a joke. Ollie shot me a look that could have meant either A, "I'm sorry you're such a loser," or B, "I'm sorry Seth is such a dickhead." I settled on B. Katie and Ollie picked up their pens and started writing down whatever Big Bobby was saying, brushing elbow for at least the 12th time. But at that moment I didn't care. My plan had succeeded. Dad's face said it all. But I wasn't proud of myself. As I watched him disappear down the corridor, I felt like the worst daughter on the planet. What had I done? I felt sorry for Dad, but more than that, I felt guilty. Even so, on that stinking hot afternoon in February, I had no idea of the chain of events I'd set in motion. How could I? I wasn't psychic. It wasn't until months later that I realized if I hadn't interfered, everything would have turned out much differently. Not just for Dad, but for all of us. And that was the first 2 chapters of Miracle. Phew, boy, teenagers are the worst. I'm really glad I never was one. This is a great book. It's an awesome mystery, and things certainly escalate from there. They go really quite wild. It's a very understated beginning, and I love that. I especially love that in a mystery. Really setting things in a kind of subtle way, hinting at future story elements to come. Definitely more hints in there than you probably realized. You should get a copy of the book just so that you can figure them all out. There's great humor. It's excellent perspective writing as well. The perspective of a 14-year-old, not just a 14-year-old, but a 14-year-old in the 1980s. There are some subjects like mental illness that are handled really deftly in this book, and one of the cool things about that is the realistic way, well, realistic as far as I would be concerned, that a 14-year-old in the 1980s who would have no reason to have ever heard of things like clinical depression reacts to learning those terms for the first time and understanding what they mean. I also have a much more selfish reason for liking Miracle. One of the key plot elements you may have noticed is that 14 years prior, there was a major earthquake. And while as far as I can tell the town of Boorunga is a fiction, the earthquake itself is not. There was, in fact, in 1972, a 6.2 moment magnitude earthquake in Central Australia, and it's called the Simpson Desert Earthquake, which was a strike-slip quake where the plates push past each other like that. It's one of the largest in Australia's history. It was also quite shallow, so it would have been very violent had you been nearby. Had there been a small town called Boorunga, I have no doubt that it would have had a lasting effect on it, as it does in the book. For comparison, if any of you went through the Christchurch earthquake sequence, as I did, the February earthquake, February 2011, was also a 6.2 of a similar depth. So that was definitely going to have always been a large earthquake. And a very interesting thing to base a book on, and a mystery novel. So big points for that. Get some more geology in your books. So I want to say thanks once again to Jennifer Lane and also to Cloud Ink Press for allowing me to do this video. There will be links in the comments to Jennifer's websites, places where you can buy this book and other works by her as well. And also Cloud Ink Press have asked me to mention that you can purchase Miracle in most good New Zealand bookshops, as well as a number of other products produced by Cloud Ink Press. I'll leave a link in the description as well to their website, which will have more work by Jennifer and other New Zealand authors. So check those out. Support New Zealand authors, guys. They need it all the way, and this is absolutely worth your time and your money. As always, thank you very much for watching and listening. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like. If you want to see more like this video, please subscribe, ring the bell, and if you have any suggestions for books I might read in the future, or you just want to have a chat about this video, this book, or any other videos, please feel free to comment below. I do try to reply and hit up all the comments that are on my videos whenever I can. So thanks so much once again, and I will see you all tomorrow.